Hey fam, welcome or welcome back. Tisha here, back for another chapter reading of The Polygamist Daughter, Anna LeBaron with Leslie Wilson. I keep forgetting to mention her because she is here in, really tiny font. But go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we jump into chapter 26. After graduation, I was excited about what the future held. I wanted to attend the International Institute of Accelerated Christian Education in Louisville, Texas, but I held off applying when my friends didn't get in. Instead, that fall, I worked as a monitor at the Spring Branch Academy Learning Center part of the day, and for Mark and Lillian the rest of the day. I kind of wish that she wouldn't have waited for anything, but okay, we'll see. Even though I was taking on more responsibility, I still thought the adults in my life treated me like one of the kids most of the time. That was never more evident than when I entered a room and everyone would stop talking. What are they hiding from me? I would wonder. I loathed and feared the secrecy. Removing myself from that toxic environment was one of the primary reasons I had escaped the cult. But keeping secrets was a way of life that wasn't easily changed. It was mid-October, 1987, soon after I turned 18. On this particular day, I was more exhausted than usual when I finished my afternoon shift at Reliance Appliance. When I got home, I just wanted to escape to my room so I wouldn't be assigned more chores to do. Moments after I changed into shorts and a t-shirt, Mark called his son Brandon and me into the home office. I studied Mark's face, which seemed lined and worn, making him look much older than his 35 years. Something's wrong. Mark rolled the office chair from beside his desk and placed it so the three of us would be sitting in a circle. I have news. He paused and glanced down at his hands, which he nervously rubbed back and forth on his jeans. Here's the deal. Dan Jordan has been killed. What? Dan Jordan. That's who convinced her mama to go back. Let's see. He was shot while on a camping trip with his family. What did he just say? I gasped. Time stopped for a moment, and I was mentally transported back to the warehouse at Michael's Appliance in Denver. I hadn't thought about it for years, but the memories came flooding back. The grueling days spent scraping crusty gunk off appliances until my arms ached, cleaning rat excrement out of stoves, collapsing into bed after 11 each night, only to get up and do it all over again at 7 a.m. Dan Jordan, the cruel tyrant, was dead. Dan Jordan, who convinced my mother to return to his sweatshop, leaving me without a parent once again. What did I feel in that moment? Not sorrow, not pain, not sadness for any of his family members. Honestly, I didn't even feel glad or thankful that justice had finally been served. Instead, I was numb. Brandon may have asked his dad some questions, but I tuned out everything except my own internal narrative until Mark broke in. Anna, are you listening? I'm sorry, what were you saying? I stared at my hands, uncomfortable for being singled out. Apparently, there's a list. What kind of list? Well, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's a hit list. Apparently, Ervil generated a list while he was in prison. He commanded his followers to carry out the killings of apostates on his behalf. Wait a second. Are you telling me that this list that they're carrying out, that man was on it? Or are you telling me that they're still carrying out this list even though the prophet that was never supposed to be gone is dead? Like, where are we going with this here, people? My stomach rolled with a wave of nausea as I realized what Mark meant. My father was responsible for Dan's death. He hadn't pulled the trigger, but he had given the directive. He ordered someone to kill Dan, and that disciple did as asked. Bible burned in my throat, and I coughed and tried to swallow. Oh, I said Bible. Bile burned in my throat, and I coughed and tried to swallow it back down. I gulped down the glass of water that Lillian had brought in as we started our meeting. Are you okay? Mark's eyes searched my face. I will be. It's just a lot to take in. I breathed in deeply and leaned back in the chair. Oh my goodness. I bet you are they going to be on the list? Okay, let's see. Unfortunately, there's more to it. I picked at a cuticle as Mark continued. Ervil wanted anyone who had ever disobeyed one of his orders to be killed, murdered in cold blood. During his latter years in prison, he went completely insane. I don't know if it was being in prison or if the little bit of power he enjoyed went to his head, but he not only believed himself to be a prophet, he also believed he could direct his followers to carry out blood atonement on his behalf. What's blood atonement? Brandon asked, his eyes wide. Mark explained. Bottom line, blood atonement is the shedding of blood to pay for someone's sins. It basically cleanses that person for the evil they've perpetrated or the evil you believe they've perpetuated. No, perpetrated. Perpetrated. Yeah, perpetrated. Do you remember your mom and I discussing how Ervil and Dan had a falling out a while back? Brandon whispered, no. Ervil asked several of us to come with guns ablazing and bust him out of prison. But none of us wanted to follow his orders because we knew it would be a suicide mission, an impossible task. Well, you can imagine how angry that would make your father, Anna. Who did he ask? I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear the answer. Dan Jordan, your brother Ed, and my brother Dwayne. Mark lowered his eyes. And me. In other words, he's at risk. He paused to let his words sink in. And now Dan is dead. My pulse quickened. I wondered whether my mother and others who weren't on the hit list, but closely connected to those who were, would also be in danger. I could see tears pooling in Brandon's eyes, but he hastily wiped them away with the back of his hand. Yes, and because my name is on that list, it means someone could be coming after me. Obviously, we can't know that for sure, and I'm not saying any of this to scare you. Lily and I just want to take a few necessary precautions. We're going to have to be extra vigilant and watch out for each other. I need you two to help us watch out for the 5 younger children. Be careful. If you have a strange feeling about something or are wary about going to someplace, let us know. If anything seems out of the ordinary, tell us. This is a lot. You tell her that Dan's dead. Then you tell her about this list. Tell them about blood atonement. Tell them that this man who had some issues with his mental, just like some of the other people in his family, has put out hits and people are carrying them out even though he's no longer living. It took a few minutes for the enormity of what Mark was saying to begin to sink in. Was Mark really next on my dad's hit list? How could that be possible? My father loved Mark. He'd given Lillian to him in marriage because he loved and trusted him. I knew Mark had been one of my dad's most devoted disciples at one time. But then Mark and Lillian left the cult, began attending a Christian church, and sent their children to a Christian school. They harbored me when I fled. Would those sins, coupled with Mark's refusal to break my dad out of prison, be enough to fuel such a horrific fire of retribution? Brandon broke the silence. What are you going to do, Dad? Mark rubbed his eyes vigorously and sighed. He took a sip of water and went on. Listen, We could uproot and move to Timbuktu, or we can just trust God for his protection. I'd rather do that. I refuse to live in hiding. That's a big decision to make. Wow. Brandon pressed his lips into a firm line and nodded his affirmation. I wasn't so sure. Having lived under the oppression of Dan Jordan for 2 years, I knew what kind of tormentor the man was. For Dan's murderer to have been orchestrated by my dad and carried out by dad's fanatic followers seemed to grant my father an awful, far-reaching power beyond the grave. I didn't want that kind of power coming after me or Mark and Lillian and their children or anyone else I loved. I shared Brandon's anxiety. So are we going to do anything? Yes, we're obviously going to do something. We're going to prepare to defend ourselves if needed. How? Brandon's jaw clenched. I've brought some guns so we can take care of anyone who tries to hurt us. Y'all are jumping a whole bunch of steps here. Like, what in the world? I get it. Like, protect your family is just, wow. Like, this is a lot to take in. I'm reading it and it feels like a lot. So I can only imagine how her at 18 felt hearing all of this, right? Mark took a key out of his top desk drawer and opened a cabinet in the closet. He pulled out a shotgun for us to see. I got this shotgun to keep with me at the shop, and I've got a couple of handguns here at the house. Obviously, we need to keep them locked up for the safety of the younger kids, but just know that we have them if they are needed. His eyes began to get misty, and his Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he swallowed. Before I went to sleep that night, I pulled a wide, flat box from underneath my bed. I lifted a few papers, award certificates from school, and random photos off the top to reveal a book I'd first read 3 years before. I don't remember how I came to possess Prophet of Blood, but I was fascinated that it was about people in my family. The revelations that journalists Ben Bradley and Dale Van Atta had uncovered startled me. I don't know if I said that name right, Atta. The authors gave an in-depth account of what they depicted as my father's calculated violence against members of his own family who tried to expose his church and teachings. According to the book, Ed Markson and Mark, yes, Lillian's Mark, along with Dwayne and Raina Chynoweth, Chynoweth, the same Raina who had so thoughtfully cared for me in Caleria, Mexico, had obediently carried out several of those murders, including the elimination of one of my half-sisters, Rebecca. Mentally unstable, probably from the abuse and mind games at the hands of cult members, Rebecca threatened to flee the church and spouted off about going to the police. Oh no. Exposing the family's activities, including the practices of underage polygamy and blood atonement to the police and the FBI, would also mean exposing my father for the monster he was. The first time I saw Mark's name connected with these events was beyond disturbing. As unnerved as I was, and as much as I wanted to ask him questions about what he had done, I had learned long ago in our family that don't ask, don't tell was our mantra. So I tried my best to dismiss what I read, believing that at the time, Mark couldn't do anything but obey my father. At times, I wanted to burn the book or rip out its pages one by one, and yet I couldn't deny the research behind the journalist's assertions. They had interviewed hundreds of people, including former cult members and law enforcement. Like someone unable to look away from a horrible car accident, I devoured the book, equally mesmerized and terrified, reading it several times. My stomach was always in knots as I read about my dad's violent nature, and yet I felt compelled to continue. Within its pages, so many things were brought to light. Suddenly, so many mysteries made sense. Questions swirling about our time in Mexico, our repeated moves, the quick exits from houses where we barely had time to unpack our meager belongings, the fact that we weren't allowed to make friends with kids outside the group and context, they now held significance. The fall and winter at the beach house with Ramona and her girls wasn't a vacation for them. Ramona and the other adults had been hiding for exacting the blood covenant on the heads of rival cult leaders and others who dared to leave. This is the stuff that is like super duper dark, because this man was able to get all these people who seemed to be kind to commit these acts in the name of wiping them clean of their sins. Meanwhile, they're all committing sins of their own by even thinking of doing this. The irony of it all to me. And he had power and they did it. It was hard for me to imagine that sweet Ramona had been involved in any of that. I trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I read about the murders said to have been carried out in cold blood by people I knew and loved dearly, family members I ate dinner with each night. I wondered how my dad could be that evil and exert that kind of dominance over his followers. Every time I read Prophet of Blood, I feared for my life. And now the blood covenant had come full circle. Mark had a price on his head. No one ever talked about blood atonement when we were younger. At least they never talked about it with me. When I was young, I do remember one of the sister wives saying, "If you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword," which meant nothing to me until now. The phrase hot lead, cold steel, and a one-way ticket to hell finally had context. I closed the book and returned it to its hiding place under my bed. I fought sleep the entire night as visions of Dan Jordan being gunned down replayed again and again and again. Thoughts of masked gunmen entering our home here and shooting Mark and Lillian and anyone else they felt deserved blood atonement tormented me. We didn't go to Dan's funeral in Denver, but my mom and some of my siblings who lived there represented our family. Though Mark, Lillian, Brandon, and I tried to act as if things were normal, in the aftermath of Dan's murder, for weeks we lived on high alert and on occasion borderline panic. But as time passed, things slowly returned to normal. After all, we lived nearly 1,000 miles, 17 or 8 hours by car from Denver, where Dan's family resided. Our fear lessened and our anxiety lifted, anxiety lifted more and more with each passing day until finally we began to live more relaxed and unguarded lives. That's a lot. That is a lot. I'm glad that they seem to have been okay, but the thought of living your life with a price on your head, unnecessary stress. Unnecessary stress. But I'm glad that he, had faith that, he would be okay and made sure he took whatever precautions he deemed necessary to protect himself and his family. Chapter 27. I love my job with the younger students at the school, and I especially relish being recognized in the church as one of the adults. I knew I could handle whatever responsibilities were sent my way. In early 1988, I developed a cough that wouldn't go away and began to become easily fatigued, but I kept plunging away at both jobs as best as I could. I knew better than to use an inconvenient illness as an excuse to slow down. After all, Lillian didn't slow down, ever. When she was pregnant, she worked just as hard as she always did. If she picked up an illness from one of the kids, she powered through with over-the-counter medications. I hope this isn't anything serious. I try to follow her lead and usually manage to work almost as hard as she did until my cough developed into walking pneumonia. When I didn't get better, Lillian suggested I make an appointment to see our family doctor, which I drove myself to. During my initial visit, the doctor prescribed medications and instructed me to rest, an impossible task with my morning job at the school, my responsibilities with Lillian's children, and my afternoon job with Reliance Appliance. A few weeks later, I was still dragging, so I made another doctor's appointment. Once again, he emphasized the need for rest and handed me a prescription for an even stronger antibiotic. The school year ended, and so did my job, but I quickly filled those hours working at Reliance or shuttling the kids to their various activities. A few weeks later, I returned to the doctor and left with more meds. Girl, sit down. Sit, your lungs are compromised. Sit down. And you're not getting any of the children, sick. Like, what are we doing here? Since I'd never had to purchase prescription medication before, I didn't realize how much they cost. If I hadn't seen my savings account dwindling, I might have kept up the doctor prescription wait pattern even longer until I needed to be hospitalized. But my desperation to hold on to my hard-earned money motivated me to try to get well. I definitely wasn't improving. In fact, I felt more and more tired as time went on. I did my best to continue functioning at the level I maintained when I was healthy, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Plus, continually taking time off work to go to doctor's appointments affected my productivity. One evening, after I finished folding the last load of laundry, I timidly approached my sister. Will you please go with me to the doctor tomorrow? I'm not getting better and I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm scared because I'm still so sick. Sure, I'll go with you. I sighed in relief and she patted my shoulder as I trudged off on the bed. On the way to the doctor's office, the following afternoon, I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes. Moments later, Lillian patted my leg and cleared her throat. Anna, there is a sickness unto death, and I don't believe you are going to die. There is a sickness unto salvation, and since you are already saved, that's not it either. There is also a sickness unto the glory of God. You probably have that kind of sickness, but let's see what the doctor says. We had just attended a Bill Gothard seminar. Oh, boy. We had just attended a Bill Gothard seminar, an annual event required by the school, and that was one of the things that we had heard him proclaim. With my head and chest heavily congested, I had difficulty wrapping my mind around what Lillian was saying. I turned and stared at her blankly for a few seconds. Just listen, Lillian, I pleaded with her. He's going to look inside my throat and ears, then listen to my lungs, and then pull out his prescription pad. It's the same thing every time, I moan. I just want to get better because these doctor visits and prescriptions have cost me almost $400 already. I knew I wasn't resting enough, but I also believe that there should be a medicine that would fix this if the doctor would just diagnose my illness correctly. It's Friday afternoon, and when we arrived at the doctor's office, Lillian took over. Anna has been sick for months, and she isn't getting any better. She really needs you to help her. This was our trusted doctor who had treated the entire family over the years, always on a cash basis since Mark and Lillian were small business owners and didn't have health insurance. He hunched his shoulders as if defeated. I've been trying, but she doesn't seem capable of slowing down. More than anything, she needs rest. I glanced sideways at Lillian, whose gaze focused directly on the doctor. The appointment went just as predicted. He checked my throat and ears and listened with his stethoscope to my lungs, front and back. When the doctor reached over to pick up the prescription pad, I burst into uncontrollable tears. Lillian put her arm around me and asked me to wait for her in the reception area. I nodded, thankful that Lillian saw with her own eyes what I had predicted would happen. Maybe I really would get better this time. Maybe hearing the doctor tell me to rest well will make Lillian realize I'm not being lazy or trying to get out of working. The doctor kindly agreed not to charge me for that visit. Lillian went with me to the drugstore and filled the prescription, and I took the first dose after I ate a few crackers and some cheese, and we got home. Soon after, I fell asleep on the living room floor while watching a movie. Lillian told me later that she and Mark had tried to wake me to send me to bed, but I didn't move. I remember fading in and out, feeling loopy, trying to talk, but nothing coherent coming out. This strong medication contained codeine designed to knock me out cold. Lillian placed a pillow under my head and covered me with a blanket. Saturday passed in a continued fog of drowsiness, but I still went to work at the appliance store, though I wasn't much help. On Sunday morning, I went to church with my family, then came straight home and went to bed. Late that afternoon, I took my medicine and headed back to the evening church services. This is her supposed to be taking a break. Y'all, and I'm guilty of this too. We got to slow down sometimes. We do. We do. During church, I started feeling loopy again. When the service was over, I tried to stand with the rest of the congregation, but I couldn't. My brain told my legs to stand up, but they wouldn't or couldn't comply. I grabbed the arm of my friend sitting next to me. I can't walk. Would you please go get Lillian? Several church members put me between them and helped walk me to the car. And when we got home, Mark and Lillian lifted me under each arm to carry me to bed. I slept hard and long. The next morning, June 27th, 1988, I woke up early as usual and got dressed for work. I ate breakfast, I took my medicine, and rested on the couch, waiting for Lillian to return with the station wagon and pick me up. Anna, 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 wake up! I heard a voice off in the distance. I woke to Lillian shaking my shoulder. I stared at her, but had difficulty keeping my eyes open. I willed myself to sit up, but I kept dozing off again. Anna, it's time to go to work. Okay, I let me. Anna, Lillian gently took my face in her hands and tilted up toward hers. I'm sorry. I'm just so sleepy. I can see that, she laughed. Well, I don't see how you could possibly work today. Why don't you just stay home and rest? She finally understood that I was really too sick to work. Relief flooded through me. She had never spoken those words to me before. No one had ever encouraged me to rest or take care of myself or even consider myself above the obligations in my life. Yeah, because here's the thing. I was wondering when that was going to happen because she heard the doctor say that she needs to rest. And yet you witness her doing everything but rest. At what point do you step in, even though you need her, as her big sister, as somebody who loves her, and say, okay, let's listen to what the doctor says and let's see if resting really helps you. I hope it does, but we'll see. Hearing the doctor's advice in person must have finally convinced Lillian. I curled up on the couch and stayed there while the children played around me. At one point, when I woke up, I asked one of the kids what time it is. 4:00. It's 4 already? I needed to take my medicine. I pushed myself up to a sitting position on the sofa. No dizziness. I said a silent prayer, thankful that I didn't feel lightheaded. I stood up slowly and plodded to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. The phone rang before I could take my medicine. I shushed the children as I picked up the phone. Hello? Anna? Yes. This is Don. Listen to me carefully. Why would Don be calling me? Years before Ramona had married Don after she had left Dan Jordan, was there something wrong with Ramona? Oh boy. Oh boy. Are you okay, Anna? He must have heard about me being carried out of church yesterday. How thoughtful of him to check on me. I'm feeling better, thank you. And the kids, are they all right? His voice sounded odd and strangled, as though he had to force his words out one at a time. Yeah? We're all doing fine. Odd that he would ask about the children. Oh boy. Melvin is on his way over to the house. Melvin, who attended our church, worked for Reliance Appliance. To Mark and Lillian's house? Yes, he should be there any minute. I noticed the same weird tone in his voice, an urgency perhaps. My stomach was balled up like a tight fist. Why is he coming here? Listen, Anna, just gather the kids together and get in the truck with Melvin. Don't ask me any questions, just do as I say. He hung up before waiting me to answer. Oh no. His last words left me unsettled. Every time I had heard those words before meant we were moving far away in a hurry or something was wrong. This couldn't be good. My mind leapt to a worst case scenario. Were Mark and Lillian dead? I knew something horrible had happened. I just didn't know what. Seconds later, I heard tires screeching as someone turned off the road into our driveway. A moment later, Melvin pounded on the front door as he entered. Anna, you need to get the kids and come with me now. I reacted much like I had during the FBI and police raids of my childhood. My instincts took over. I never asked what was wrong. I suppose a part of me didn't want to know the truth because I realized that this kind of craziness never happened in my family unless someone had been killed. On autopilot, I raced to find the kids and rushed them out the door ahead of me to Melvin's truck, which he had left running. We sat in silence as he drove us to the home of Gary and Mary Ann Hammonds, trusted members of our church. Other people from the church had been waiting on the front lawn for us to arrive and quickly ushered us into the living room where the others were whispering and praying together. A couple of women dabbed at their eyes with tissues. I was certain that what I feared was true. If Mark and Lillian are dead, who will take care of their kids? I was old enough. My brain began to formulate different scenarios, coming up with arguments I could present in court before a judge, begging him to let me raise the kids. I knew I could handle the task. I've been like a living nanny to the kids for almost 6 years. The mantle I took on in that moment weighed heavy on my heart and mind, but I knew God would help me do it and do it well. Hours went by and no one told us anything. What is going on? I tried to entertain the children by playing quiet games and telling them stories. A couple of them went into one of the bedrooms to watch TV. Everyone continued to speak in hushed tones. As desperate as I was to know the truth, I dared not to ask questions for fear of hearing the words I dreaded were coming. Finally, the front door opened. Alma Unruh, the pastor's wife, walked in. Children, Anna. She glanced my way and tightened her lips into a sympathetic smile. I have some bad news. This afternoon at about 4 o'clock, a man entered the appliance store and walked into your dad's office. He had a gun and he shot your dad. Oh. Her voice faltered as she choked back sobs. Hannah looked at me confused. I lifted her up onto my lap. I'm so sorry I have to be the one to tell you, but your dad didn't survive the gunshot wound. He died. This is ridiculous, you guys. This is ridiculous that this crazy man got so much power that even after his death, he's still responsible for the deaths of all these people. And now this young man who left the cult, who took care of his family, who gave his life to God is now gone. Ooh. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. But I want you to know that God welcomed him into heaven the moment it happened, and your dad is with Jesus right now. I hate that. I've told y'all that before. I get it. I understand it. But when you have lost somebody in a traumatic way, when you've lost anyone, period, sometimes you don't want to hear stuff like that. You just don't. It's hard enough to process everything. Don't tell me right now in my sorrow that, just I'm talking about my personal stuff right now. Let me get back to the book. Though I'd been fairly certain something tragic had occurred from the moment Don called, hearing the truth still shocked me. All around the living room, Mark and Lillian's children reacted to the news with everything from muffled sobs to loud crying. My little nieces, sitting on either side of me, burst into tears and covered their faces. I put my arms around them, pulling them both close to me. Emily clutched my arm and began repeating, "Not Daddy, not my daddy." My heart pounded in my chest, and my breaths became short, shallow pants. I did my best to hold back my tears, determined to be stoic for the children. I prayed for strength, and God answered by reminding me that Lillian was still alive. I sighed with relief. I wouldn't have to fight a judge for custody of the children. Their mother would be able to raise them by herself because Mark was dead, gunned down, murdered. My breath caught in my throat as a wave of grief engulfed me. I choked back my own tears of sadness and kissed the tops of the girls' heads. Other adults hugged sobbing children and whispered things I couldn't hear above the cries. I closed my eyes and wished I were just having a bad dream. But when I opened them, nothing had changed. The phrase Lillian had mentioned in the car on the way to the doctor's office came to mind, a sickness unto the glory of God. At the time she said it, I had no idea what she meant. How could someone's illness bring God glory? But now, 3 days later, I had total clarity. Had God planned for me to be so sick that I needed to take the medication that would knock me out and make me loopy? Had God intended that I not go to work that day? After all, He is God. He sees all and knows all. He knows what's going to happen before it happens. Mark's murder hadn't taken God by surprise. If I had gone to Reliance that day, I might have been lying next to Mark in the morgue. What a way to think about it. Ooh. Did God spare me because He had bigger plans for my life? The thought pressed hard on my heart. I have to call Celia. She lived alone in an apartment nearby, and I wanted her safe here with us as quickly as possible. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. Hi, Celia. Do you have anyone with you? My throat felt tight and my voice came out high pitched. No, I just got home from work. Can you come over to Sister Hammond's house right now? Why do I need to come to her house? Is there something wrong? Just trust me. Okay, I'll be right over. I hung up the phone, relieved that she was on her way. 10 minutes later, the front door opened and Celia rushed in, and I ran to her and held her tightly. What's wrong? She held me at an arm's length. What is it, Anna? Suddenly, she lowered her voice, looked me in the eyes, and gravely demanded, Anna, you tell me what's wrong. Marianne quickly gestured at several of us to join her in a back bedroom. Celia reluctantly followed, knowing that was the only way she would get answers to her questions. I trailed right behind her. When Sheila, our pastor's daughter, told Celia that Mark had been shot, my sister burst into gut-wrenching sobs. Is he dead? She asked weakly, clutching my hands in hers and staring at me, willing me to tell her this wasn't true. Our friend Debbie was stroking her arm, saying, keep calm. The kids are in the other room and they can hear you. I said quietly to Celia, he's gone. Celia's wailing began in earnest, and nothing could stop her from expressing her deep well of grief. Sheila went on calmly. There's more we need to tell you guys. We've just learned that Mark's brother, Dwayne, and one of Dwayne's daughters, Jenny, were also killed here in Houston. And your brother, Ed, was shot and killed in Dallas. Oh, my goodness. All of the murders happened right around 4 o'clock. I involuntarily clutched my throat as I imagined the last horrific moments in the lives of each of these precious people, all of whom were former members of my father's cult, who had each left the Church of the Lamb of God, determined to get away from the oppression. Look at the price they paid. In that instant, another dreadful thought pierced me. Celia and I also fled the cult. Would someone come after us too? What? They're all dead? Celia wailed, then doubled over. Who would do that? Jenny's just a little girl. No, no, she screamed. Whew. A gut-wrenching cry that forced her to her knees. Celia crouched there for a few seconds, then lifted her head to look at me, her eyes red and swollen. They can't be dead. They just can't be. She crawled to the bed and pulled herself up on it. I sat down next to her and put my arms around her, still trying to calm her down for the sake of the children in the other rooms. She clung to me for strength and wailed even louder. No! Mm. I loved my sister with all my heart, but I couldn't focus on Celia's grief. She would process it and move on like we always did. Instead, my thoughts turned to Lillian's children in the living room. I didn't want Celia's wails to frighten them. I lightly patted my sister's shoulder in a feeble attempt to comfort her. She rocked back and forth on the bed, her cries slowly becoming low sobs with ragged breaths in between. I continued to rub her back, stroke her hair, and whisper words to console her. Celia, shh, everything's going to be okay. I wish I could believe those words myself. And that is where we're going to end it. I feel like we spoke this up because we were talking about how great, it was to not have all these tragedies happen. And I feel so sorry for the family. And in reading this, I'm having my own memories of my brother and what happened when I found out that, he was killed. And hearing this is just, ooh. That man had talks with them because he, thought something may happen and his name was on the list. And to see the way that they carried out that list, and then they did it where they had enough people to do it at the same time in all these different locations. It's sick. It's so sick. It's so sick. You guys, let me know what you thought about this chapter. This one was heavy. I was going to read another one, but I had to take a little bit of a break. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Until next time.